Well, I bring you greetings. We all bring you greetings from West Africa, and we're looking forward to trying to share some of what we've experienced in the last 2 weeks, and we just feel very much like a team, and a team with you, because as we heard this morning, and we heard repeatedly the last 2 weeks, that those who send are a vital part of those who go. And it's just a great privilege to be with us tonight. And we really enjoyed the singing over there. So it became obvious who was the best singer. And it wasn't me. It was, and it wasn't Jeremy, and it wasn't Phil, and it wasn't Jess. So that leaves Clayton. I don't know. We want all 5 mics because we need it.
I'll switch you real quick. Are we on here? Can you hear me? All right.
I need this one too.
In African style, can I have everyone stand up, please? And I'm going to make you uncomfortable, and I'm going to ask y'all to come down as far as you can, down front. I want all these rows filled in, if we can. I know that puts you out of your comfort zone, but that's Africa.
That's right. It's missions night, right? We got to experience some of this cross-cultural
yeah, right here.
rubbing of shoulders.
Yeah.
How you doing, Pete? Good to see you. Thanks.
PowerPoint. All right, we're going to teach you, as you guys are moving down, we're going to do some African songs that we learned over there. So we're excited to share this with you, and it'll be fun. So as soon as you guys get it, just join in with us. This is fun. Wow, it's good to see you all.
There it is. Play.
Okay, there's your note.
Is that my note? Ancient words ever true,
Changing me and changing you. We have come with open hearts. Oh, let the ancient words impart. Ancient words ever true, changing me and changing you. We have come with open hearts. Oh, let the ancient words impart. Hallelujah. Ancient words ever true, changing me and changing you. We have come with open hearts. Oh, let the ancient words impart.
Good job. Give yourselves a pat. All right, we got one more for you, too. What's my note on this one?
Okay. Yeah.
Maestro?
Here we are.
There you go. Okay, here we are.
Unto
the Lord
be the glory. Great things he has done. Unto the Lord be the glory. Great things he has done. Great things he has done. Greater things he will do. Unto the Lord be the glory. Great things he has done. Unto the Lord be the glory. Great things he has done. Unto the Lord
the glory. Great things he has done.
All right. Well, you can be seated.
Great job.
Yeah, great singing. Those songs were ringing in our minds and hearts because we sang them over and over every session. It seemed like I was thinking I spoke 17 times in the last couple weeks, and we had many other sessions too. Some great exhortation from two African leaders that spoke, and many others too. But it was just a wonderful time. We had a great time, and it's fun to be back and to bring you greetings from the church in West Africa, Ghana, right. If you don't know your map, we didn't before we got there. It's the center of the world, they told us as soon as we got there, one guy said, because it's right on the equator, and it's right on the Greenwich, the longitude, latitude, whatever. It's at the center of the world. It's right there. And it was great to come back, and they were thrilled. In fact, I think both conferences, certainly the first one, we were in Accra, the capital city, about 3.6 million people. And then the next week we did the same conference up in Kumasi, a city of about 3 million, about from here to Seattle. So it took about 6 hours to get there because of the roads. But both times I think they asked us what we were doing when we got back, and it was a thrill to report that this was Missions Week, Missions Night, Missions Day, and that we were going to be hearing from one of our missionaries from Israel, and then that we would bring greetings from Ghana and the African church, and boy, that thrilled them. And it is really neat that the Lord put it together in that way. And Rod, I so appreciated your exhortation and teaching this morning. I mean, that was just what we'd been hearing, really. It was right on task. We were assigned the task or the topic, the church in mission, a lifeline to a dying world. And we were exhorted for 2 weeks on the very subject that you talked to us about, the Great Rescue Mission. And boy, it refocused our minds and hearts on what really counts. How will they call upon him? You know, whoever will call upon the Lord can be saved, but how will they call upon him if they haven't believed? And how will they believe if they haven't heard? And how will they hear without a preacher? And how will they preach unless they are sent? And it was so good to hear the African heart on those subjects. Those questions, those great questions of Romans. You know, the gospel, and we spent a lot of time in Romans, the gospel is the power of God for salvation, for rescue, to everyone who believes. Anyone, everyone. The Jew, the Greek, in it the righteousness of God is revealed, and whoever will call upon him will be saved. But how are they going to call upon him in whom they have not believed? And how will they believe in whom they have not heard? And those questions were hauntingly raised repeatedly. And how will they hear if no one preaches? And how will they preach unless they're sent? And Billy, spelled G-B-I-L-E, it wasn't like, some Americanized Billy. Billy Akani, a Nigerian, challenged us that first week so strongly about these questions. And he wasn't challenging us, he was challenging the Ghana church to be part of sending the gospel to the nations. And to sit in on that and be part of that was thrilling, to say the least. Now, I was invited to go about a year ago or something like that, I've forgotten just when, to these pastors' conferences and teach pastors by Challenge Enterprise. This wasn't a Romans Project conference. There were 1,400 pastors gathered, and Challenge Enterprise, I'd never heard of it, and probably you haven't either. You could kind of think Moody Press, or it's an offshoot of SIM in the old days, but it's an independent agency in Ghana that crosses the denominational barriers, which is very, very healthy any country, any continent, but in Africa, very, very valuable because just like here, there tends to be these barriers that divide the church. But Challenge Enterprises really umbrellas that, and they have a real passion to equip pastors. And so they have this annual pastors conference, and it was our privilege to minister to them and to be ministered to. And as I said, Romans Project really just getting a foothold in Ghana. Rick and Mark were in there just briefly I think it was last September. And we have a coordinator there, a godly pastor who has a very good reputation throughout the country, and he's really excited about the Romans Project. But the Romans Project, if you're not aware of it, John Corey launched it. John Corey, a missionary from our congregation in Africa for most of his life, in East Russia. He just got a lot of heart for the world. He saw the great need to train pastors, and he was taking a boombox in and giving them messages as I was teaching. I don't know really what message he was bringing, but he'd bring a handful of discs, and he could train 2 or 3 that way, and he was seeing that be fruitful, but he was thinking, I need to multiply this effort. And when the MP3 technology came along, John left here, and all this has happened so quickly, it really is amazing, and we verified it with the Liberian guy, Momo, that we'll be talking about. And it was in 2009, I believe that was John's last trip, 2009, to Liberia. And this dear friend and colleague of his, Momo, that in Liberia there, they said, what if we challenged pastors to reading Romans 20 times and copying it out by hand? And if you've been around this congregation, you know that I'm a zealot for that kind of thing. Repeated reading of the systematic explanation of the gospel sinks it into your heart. And then copying it out by hand. And if they would do that, they would get an MP3 player with the 109 messages when I taught through Romans here in our pulpit 10 or 15 years ago, and then another overview of Romans in 17 weeks, and then many other books. And many of you know all about that, but many of you don't too, so I'm explaining it again. And if they did that, what would happen? And Momo was telling us in our hotel room, because every night we gathered for devotions, and he said, the first thing John said was, let's just pray about this and see if God is in it, what God would say. And it's been bathed in prayer from the beginning, but it did explode. As John challenged pastors, God is at work in Africa. And they began to give themselves to the book of Romans. And many of you have heard the story from there. Momo reported that over 1,600 pastors in Liberia have completed the Romans Project and are listening to the teaching, and they're giving us these testimonials back. And it just goes on in Nigeria and Uganda and Ethiopia and Kenya. Over 6,500 have completed they call it kind of graduation, and they get their MP3 and they begin listening to the teaching, and they're getting grounded in the Scripture and in the gospel, and there's a great need for that in Africa. The church has kind of exploded, but as we saw firsthand, and the guys will be sharing with you, there's a real need for a deepening understanding of the gospel, even in the pulpit. In fact, especially in the pulpit. So I wanted to give you that kind of perspective and just say that we're thrilled that we can be a small part of what's happening. And we want you to know that you're a big part of it too, because this is such a, the very questions that Romans calls out, there's no part that isn't absolutely necessary in the missionary process. And I think Rod so exhorted us today. And if I misspeak, or if the guys do, we just did get off the plane, and we're kind of on a different time zone. And we'd traveled, I was either speaking or traveling by land or air for 48 straight hours. So last night when we gathered for a meal at our house, and I was just kind of rummy, and one of the grandkids had this little plastic, kitchen stuff, and it was a waffle. And she said, would you like a waffle, Grandpa? And I said, thank you for the wallet. And I said, I know that's not the right word for that, but I couldn't bring, I still can't, what is it, a waffle. I couldn't bring it to mind. So give us a little slack tonight because we were putting this together about an hour ago. Who's going to talk about what? And then the biggest fear they had is what I'm doing right now is talking too much. So I'm just going to shut up and let these guys share. We had a great time as a team, and I forget where we're starting.
We'll start here.
Right here, yeah.
I had the opportunity of sitting at the registration table, so kind of fielding all the guys who were hearing about the Romans Project and excited about it. And I got the question, what is the Romans Project? I got it a lot. And so Scott already touched on it a little bit, but I'll briefly touch on it again.
Real quick, one of the things they did in Africa was repeat themselves. So we may say the same thing over and over and over again.
And we'll blame that on the jet lag and Africa. So anyway, I would just say it's, read the book of Romans 20 times, copy it out by hand once. And if you do that, you get a little MP3 player, and I'd show them it, and I'd say there's 800 messages from Reverend Scott Gilchrist. Yeah, you have to say Reverend. 800 expository messages, so verse by verse teaching through a book of the Bible. So I shared that a lot, just in case some of you didn't know. And I guess, next slide, I want to talk about a little bit about what we saw as we were driving around. You'll see, I don't know, it's hard to see, but it says, Catch the Fire, Prophetic Conference 2012. There's power in the blood. And so you'll see prophetess, blah, blah, prophet, blah, blah, archbishop, blah, blah. And so there's a bunch of these signs all over Ghana. And it kind of just shows that, Africa's hungry for God, but there's a lot of people out there who have a different message, and maybe it kind of looks close, like a wolf in sheep's clothing almost. But yeah, it's just not the bread of life. It's not the good food. So, but in the course of that, there is good teaching and good Bible over there too. So we got to enjoy a lot of that at the Challenge Conference. But just talking about that, I had a little story about this guy I met there. He's children and youth ministry coordinator, leader, one of the guys attending the conference. His name was Adjoke. And I asked him, what was the thing you're going to take home with you from this conference, or what are you learning here? And he said, the speaker who was just up, his name was Steve. He said, we're going to give an account to God of our deeds and what we did. And to him, he was like, yeah, I heard that, and, we're going to give an account, and so I just want to make sure I go back and I do a really good job and stuff. And what he said in there, I was like, And I said, do you think that you'll go to hell if you don't do a good job in youth ministry? And he said, yeah. And I said, oh. And I was just like, well, and I just went to Romans. I said, in Romans 3:23, it says, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And so we're all sinners. And later, earlier in Romans 3, it says, by works of the law, no human being will be justified. No human being will go to heaven based on your good works. And so, to hear that from him worried me just a little bit, because, you think of what he may be teaching the kiddos. But I shared that with him, and just that, the righteousness of God, it goes on, the righteousness of God is through Jesus Christ by faith. And he agreed with me there too. So it wasn't that he was way off, but kind of, and it just worried me a little bit because of the shallowness of the teaching over there. You can have people not knowing the truth and what you need to know, when it comes to the basics of the gospel and what we believe as Christians. And so I said, yeah, you'll give an account, but, that's not what's going to get you into heaven. It's going to be Christ and what he did for us. So then I just challenged him, hey, I'm here with the Romans Project, and, I'd love to have you sign up and read the book of Romans 20 times and copy it out by hand once. And then you'll receive this MP3 player. And he was pretty excited about that. And so right now, I'm sure, by God's grace, he's copying out the book of Romans and reading it through and just getting a good foundation in the Gospel of Romans. And so that was kind of the, one of the goals of the trip. And we appreciate the prayers, because I know a lot of you were praying for those situations specifically and talking to pastors over there. So that's just one aspect of, just what I wanted to share. So I don't know who's next.
Well, I loved many things about the trip, and as these guys are going to share, and just the privilege of being able to go over there and be sent by all the people back here in the States, and to be with this group of guys was just phenomenal. And to be hearing the teaching also that Dad was giving and the other African pastors. But as Clayton mentioned, one of the things that we really realized pretty quickly in talking to some of the local church pastors as we got to know them at the beginning of the conference was the distortion of the gospel. And that the billboards that you saw and the very power-driven teaching and what can I gain from God was kind of a theme. And then alongside of that, so seeing that also coming from within, so the teaching inside the Christian churches that was pretty prolific throughout was also the Islamic influence. And there's a picture that you'll see right here in one spot. You can't quite see them, but you can see a few of them. Just sitting at one stoplight, I could count 5 mosques that I could see from sitting in one spot. And they're prevalent throughout all of the areas that we saw of Ghana. And so those two things were definitely having huge influence. In the previous picture, there's one of the, just on a personal note, this was one of the employees at our hotel, and there's 2 employees that I got to know. We would be up late at night. Some of us younger guys would be up till the wee hours, and they served dinner late, and with our schedule, we'd be eating dinner around 9, 10 o'clock at night. And so the servers really enjoyed talking to us. And this is Tony, and we got the opportunity to share the gospel with Tony and with another guy named Abraham. And it was interesting to see they both, one had a Islamic faith, and then one had a Christian faith, he said. And talking to both of them, neither one of them knew what the real gospel was. And they were pointing to pastors that they'd seen on TV from the U.S. or asking us about that. Or they'd seen other pastors off of some of the billboards and heard some of their messages, and they could see through what was being said and said, that doesn't seem like what I've read of the Bible. And so they were seeing hypocrisy. And so there's a real need for true biblical teaching. One of the pastors, just another note to touch on, that spoke, the guy in the middle, is Steve Asante. Rick Kallenberg's on the left and my dad's on the right. He was the pastor in Kumasi, and the other one that my dad mentioned was Billy Akani the first week. And another really neat thing that happened was those 2 pastors, my dad was able to just preach the word like you all know he does. And he just laid a great biblical foundation of the gospel, of teaching in Romans, really challenging these pastors. And then the African pastors, they would switch speaking, and there'd be 4 sessions a day. And the African pastors were really able to challenge those leaders, the pastors that were at the conference, in issues that were prevalent in their churches. And they were really hitting at the heart of what they know because they live there and are seeing happening in the church. And they were really able to challenge those pastors on the specific issues. And to see the 2 combining of the teachings and from different parts of the world, it was just one of the many answers to prayer. And on just one more example, an answer to prayer, we were able to take over about 1,500 MP3 players And once we got them there, they were all packed all over in our luggage. We needed to send them with a few of these pastors so they could go from where we were in Accra to the different parts, to Nigeria, to Liberia. And as a team, just to give an example of the answered prayer that we saw over and over, we were sitting there outside on the porch at the hotel eating lunch at about 4 o'clock, and it'd be like sitting on 217, off of 217 at, like, I think there's an Embassy Suite or some hotel there off of 217. It's sitting there, and a guy walking down 217 on the side of the road with 3 pieces of luggage on top of his head. And as we're talking about that we need to pray to find luggage so we can put the MP3s in and send with the pastors, one of the guys notices and says, "Look at that. There's luggage right there." And he was selling the luggage. And it happens more frequent in Africa, but to be on the side of a freeway walking around literally within 2 minutes of us talking about it and need to figure this out and we need to pray about it. And that was just one example of how God answered prayer over and over and over.
So Clayton and Jess just kind of gave you guys an overview of the need in Ghana specifically, and just kind of some of the things we saw. And I'm just going to kind of walk over how the need is being met. So excitingly, we get to report that through the 2 conferences, there was around 1,500 pastors or leaders that attended the 2 weeks. 550 of those pastors signed up and are actively doing the Romans Project right now, which is huge. Scott and Rick gave just a short 20-minute explanation of the Romans Project on Wednesday, so halfway through the conference. And after that, I think there was a photo somewhere. Here's Clayton getting swarmed. He had a hand cramp the whole week because he was writing receipts, but there was just a positive response to the Romans Project and to the idea of writing out and rereading the Gospel of Romans. And it's also, we were kind of talking about in our hotel, the fun of how the Romans Project has a compound interest effect. So 550 pastors are doing it right now. And to think about, we talked to multiple pastors, and we got an average of about 50 church members in their churches. So to think about that, that's 25,000 people that they're encouraging to do the Romans Project, or impacting through them doing the Romans Project. And it just goes from there. And you can do the math to think about the 6,500 plus these 550, and just how that number can grow and how really exciting that is. Jess touched on prayer being answered, and it was all the way through. And as I think about it, prayer was answered through tonight. For me to sing in public
Is huge.
I don't
Very
know.
huge.
I should have left, but I'm here. But many things, just we are all healthy throughout the whole 2 weeks. The ability to figure out for all of us to get work off for 2 weeks. Another huge thing was the fact that the Holy Spirit works in an amazing way. Scott had never met Steve or Billy, never talked to them about the talks that they were giving. They just had the theme of the week. And from the other side of the globe, the Lord gave them messages on both weeks that just coincided so well. We were talking about it, and Scott seemed to give the skeleton of the message, and then the African pastor would come in with the flesh and exhort, and they're walking halfway down the aisle and back and doing their thing, but God worked and works in an amazing way. And just to go with that, keep praying for Ghana, pray for Africa, pray for the Romans Project, because God is working in Africa. It was really fun to see Billy Akani kind of exhort his congregation that was there to go out, and for him to talk to the Africans in the way of, our whole lives, Americans have been coming to us to feed us. You need to turn around and go out and feed. And so he was, really exhorting them to go on mission and to spread the gospel that way. So what we did and what we're doing, just to give you guys a background too, we we challenged ourselves to take video and footage of the whole thing. So our idea was to be able to bring back and create 2 to 4 videos that we can use to help share and spread the vision and the heart and the potential of the Romans Project. So there was a lot of prayer over the video, doing the videos and the interviews, because we had no experience. So that is exciting to think from a marketing standpoint and from the idea of there's so much potential here, and we need to use footage mainly to really spread the news in that way.
A lot of testimonials from pastors.
Yeah, definitely. And just one short story as far as going through the airport. We all agreed that we had the most prayed over luggage that we had ever touched. So 1,520 MP3 players stuck in between everything we were trying to take. And we're walking through and we're getting it. We're in the airport and we're going through customs. And, Rick kind of turned around to us and just said, don't say anything. Let me take care of this. So we're walking through and we get up and he had his eye on one of the customs guys, and we walk right up to him and Rick gives him a hug and says, I'm bringing my friends from America the first time to Africa, and he got all happy and he goes, what do you have for me? And Rick reaches in his pocket, pulls out some headphones, gives him the headphones, and he just was ecstatic and let us right through. So not one piece of luggage got opened or looked at.
They were the headphones from the airplane,
Yeah, real high end.
It wasn't bribery.
Not at all, but we just worked our way right through.
The point in that was all the prayer, and his eyes being closed, and we just literally walked right through.
Yeah, Jeremy.
So our team, I just wanted to comment on that. Our team was amazing, and the fact that we're related was amazing to me. When I first got the call from Scott, hey, do you want to go to Africa with me and a couple other guys I know, I said, who are they? And when he told me who they were, I thought, well, of course, I'll take 2 weeks off of work just for that and that alone, knowing these guys' hearts for the Lord and wanting to glorify Him. And then as Scott explained, hey, we want to go to Africa and do the Romans Project or promote it, what more motivation that gave me. Oh, man, to be with these guys, serving the Lord, absolutely, hands down, I'm in. And we had comments on our team from other teammates. The 5 of us, and as Scott mentioned earlier, Rick Kallenberg was with us, and Momo Sena, the Romans Project coordinator in Liberia, he joined us partway through, as well as Titus Taraki. And you can see here, Titus is on my right. He's the Romans Project coordinator in Nigeria. And so it was 8 of us, so to speak, promoting the Romans Project in the midst of the Challenge Conference. But both guys, Momo, in our evenings, we would have devotions, about 2 hours, 2.5 hours, sometimes longer, depending on who was talking. And we'd pray and get in the Word. But one of the things that Momo pointed out was, this reminds me of heaven. You guys here, you're a different color than me, but when we get to heaven, this is what it's going to be like. And just referring to the teamwork, that we were in this together for the glory of God, and it didn't matter where we were from. Titus Taraki, he commented, teamwork. 2 different times he brought it up. I am amazed at how you guys just work together. And I was too, given the fact that I didn't know exactly what I was going to be doing before we left. And God did. And we were in it to serve Him, and He really united us as a team. And we really had nothing in the way of conflict to speak of. So thank you for praying for our team, because that was evident. And I wanted to comment a little bit about Momo as well, just so you get to know him. When I heard of the Romans Project back in Montana, I just figured, hey, let's give some money and help promote this. But I didn't really understand what it took on the ground in Africa. Well, as the Romans Project coordinator in Africa, Momo as Scott said, John Corey began about 2.5 years ago working with him, training him in the study of Romans himself. And so Momo read it, Romans 20 times, copied it out, and through that, it gave him a desire and a passion to spread this to the pastors in his home country. And so as an African, he has taken up that challenge. He has 5 kids. He does not have a vehicle, and yet over the last 2.5 years, he's traveled on public transportation up to 12 hours to put on these Romans Project conferences, which teach pastors what the Romans Project is. And as Scott mentioned, 1,600 pastors now have finished the challenge. And to comment on the compound effect of that, over 75,000 people in Liberia being affected by the Romans Project. How powerful that is. And he's not really getting compensated, so to speak, by our standards, that is. Yeah, maybe a little bit, but the volunteer work, he has a full-time job. He himself is a pastor, and he's volunteered to participate in the Romans Project. And I asked myself, what motivates a guy like this, who already has a full-time job in the ministry, to give up more time away from his family, his 5 kids? I mean, I think of myself with 4 kids. Wow, that would be a lot. And yet he has committed himself to doing this. What motivates him? Titus Taraki, the Romans Project coordinator in Nigeria, he has 5 kids as well. He has an unknown age because his parents didn't know how to read and write when he was born. But he works full-time in Nigeria, Jos, the central city in Nigeria, as an African missionary to other Africans. And because of his status, he is really the perfect guy for the project, so to speak. He knows a lot of other pastors and leaders in Nigeria. And 9 months ago, he was challenged to take up the Romans challenge himself, and he read the book 20 times. And that was amazing because in his own words, he said, I have a lot of training. I have been to Bible school, I've done this training and this training and this training. By the time I do all that, I have read the book of Romans, I've studied it, and probably taught parts of it. And so he was almost offended by the challenge initially, but he took it up, he read it, he wrote it out, and he said, now I see why the Romans Project is being used by God in Africa. We need depth. And he began to use the contacts that he had, and in 9 short months, so this was the beginning of this year, January 2012, in 9 short months, he's put on 9 different conferences, and over 1,000 pastors in Nigeria now have completed reading and writing it out. They've all received their MP3 player. And I asked myself, what would motivate a guy like Titus Taraki, nicknamed the Chief by our team, to do this? He's busy. And not only is this something that takes up time, but it's dangerous. And I just wanted to point that out to you to help you pray, because it's going to help me pray for him. Not long ago, he was heading north in Nigeria to a town named Kano. And if you know Nigeria, the northern part is primarily Islamic, southern part more Christian. Well, as he was traveling in his vehicle, he saw some commotion entering into the city, and he didn't know what to do. People were running, and he continued onward behind the other people driving. And as he got into town, he later realized that Boko Haram, the militant group, terrorists, were killing people, pulling them out of their cars and killing them. And it just impacted me that, wow, this is not something that he's taking lightly. There was another situation that he commented on. His car locked up as he was driving on the freeway, and he needed to get over, and he just was thanking the Lord how the Lord protected him as he got over to the side of the road. But time, energy, risk of his own life, what motivates? He's already in the ministry so to speak. He is a missionary, a leader of missionaries. Why would he do this? And I don't know exactly in his words how he would put it, but when I read Paul's letter to Timothy at the end of his life, I think Titus and Momo would probably both say the motivation and encouragement that Paul gave to Timothy is motivation for Titus and for Momo themselves. I just want to read in verse 16 of chapter 3, it says, "All Scripture is inspired by God and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, for training in righteousness." And you've heard a little bit about the need for that in Africa. The Romans Project is giving them inspired Scripture so that the man of God may be adequate, equipped for every good work. These African pastors need to be equipped. "I solemnly charge you in the presence of God and of Christ Jesus, who is to judge the living and the dead, and by his appearing and his kingdom, preach the word." A lot of African pastors are not preaching the word. Prosperity, as you heard, other things. Be ready in season and out of season. If the word's not in you, you're not going to be ready. Reprove, rebuke, exhort with great patience and instruction. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but wanting to have their ears tickled, they will accumulate for themselves teachers in accordance to their own desire, and will turn away their ears from the truth and will turn aside to myths. That's happening in Africa. "But you, be sober in all things, endure hardship, do the work of an evangelist, fulfill your ministry." And when I look at Titus and Momo, I see them fulfilling the ministry that God has called them to in Africa. And I myself am motivated to say, am I fulfilling the ministry God has given me to? I have a family, I have 4 kids, I have a job, but am I fulfilling the ministry that God is calling me to save souls? Rod, thanks this morning. And I would encourage you to ask that same question. Are you fulfilling the ministry that God has called you to? Great way to do it. Get involved in the Romans Project.
Just a note real quick on the MP3. I don't think Mark kind of touched on this, but the pastors over there, a lot of them aren't trained biblically or go to seminary like we would think of maybe here. And or they don't agree with the teaching at the church and they go start their own churches, is what we heard from a lot of the African pastors there that are wanting the word to be preached. And Momo, who he was just talking about, kept saying to us a few times during the week, this MP3, and he'd hold it in his hand, is like biblical seminary that you can take anywhere you go. And so it's very sound doctrinal teaching on the Bible and systematic the way Dad has been preaching here. And so that gives these guys an opportunity that are leading congregations that haven't had the training. And so that the tool is so powerful for these guys because it's teaching they can't afford or haven't gotten, and that will bring them, Lord willing, back to preaching the gospel.
As Momo put it, the Mobile Dental College, right here, $25.
Minus dental.
Minus dental.
I also want to
would
add
like that.
the average church service was about 3 hours, so get comfortable.
Yeah, we've got another 2, so.
That was just an introduction he gave earlier.
We're
I
going
like
around
the
a couple
African
times.
church. I like their ways. Well, you know, it is hard to describe. We can't, obviously, everything we experienced. But one thing that really hit me, and I was sharing with Chris when I got it through on the phone, and since I got back, there's a lack of training that these guys have just talked about. There's a lack of being grounded in the gospel. Pastors are coming to understand the gospel and personally coming to Christ. Much like John Wesley was out on mission and didn't really know the gospel until he read Luther's, he didn't read it, it was read aloud. Luther's introduction to Romans. And in verse 17, in the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed. And God used that to save John Wesley. And that's happening through this project as men are getting into the Romans. And at the same time, I want to say God, it's a God thing we say sometimes. I sensed that the whole time we were there because God is at work. The two speakers that I had the privilege of sharing the pulpit with, Billy Akani, let me just talk about him a bit. We asked him to come to our room and pray with us before we'd even heard him speak. And he came in and just gracious and humble. And I asked him, Billy, how are you converted? And he quietly told us of his dad being a very powerful witch doctor. And he was born into that, and his dad was the man in that region. And he, he's got the scars on each cheek of his tribe. And he's about my age, I would guess, now. But he talked about how each son, the oracles, they would read the oracles to determine and his older brothers, the oracles, put them into the demonic realm. And when they read the oracles, when he was born, they couldn't get any clarity on the oracles. And so they dare not cross the oracles. And so they allowed him to go to school and not just forced him into and I've forgotten already some of the details. We're going to have to compare notes, but he came to Christ at, 18 or so. And it wasn't easy because he saw the hypocrisy in the church. He knew he didn't want to be in the demonic stuff, but he knew there was power there. And he watched so-called Christian pastors come to his dad for power. And he saw, there's no power in this Jesus. And so he tried Islam for a while, and he was looking for power. And more than that, the gospel. He found it. The gospel gripped him, and he's been preaching the gospel since then. Of course, he was disowned by his dad. He told the story, and it was just a moving story. And then we heard him get up, and he's a gifted and powerful preacher. Biblically drenched, I would say, just saturated. And I told Chris on the phone, I don't have a category for him. I can't say he's like so-and-so in America. I was very impressed with him. And he commented publicly on it, like Jess was saying. He was preparing in Nigeria. They gave him the subject. I was preparing in Oregon, and we didn't compare notes at all. And it was just like the Lord answered much prayer and brought this together in a way that was remarkable. We went up to Kumasi thinking, all of us, I think to a man, we were so impressed with Billy, and I repeat, G-B-I-L-E, authentic African disciple of Christ, who's been used to shepherd shepherds, and we can praise God for that. We go up to Kumasi thinking, whatever we get up there won't be as good. And Steve, that sounds very Western, the name, but again, authentically a Ghanan, through and through, he opened up the Word. And I would call him biblically saturated. And as the week wore on, I was more and more impressed with his balance and biblical ballast. And so thankful that he was exhorting these pastors alongside me because, as Jess said, he knows their situation. And God has raised up some men like that. That's not the norm. Rick said after the first week, he said, I want you guys to know in all my years in Africa, and Rick's been there basically since '84, off and on. He's spent his adult life in Africa. He said, Billy is an African that teaches that way is just very, very, I don't know of any others. Well, then at the end of the 2 weeks, he said, I want you guys to know that those two men were outside any categories I've seen. It was just remarkable. And I say that to God be the glory because he has raised up men and there's a great need for more. And both of them, particularly Steve at the end, was just all over the Romans Project, saying this is exactly what we need. And we didn't have the time and we don't have the expertise, but we got very good footage of him exhorting African pastors to participate in this, and he's well known throughout the region, so I think it will be very useful. But it is amazing to see how God raised up those two guys for this particular conference. They've never met. I said to Steve, Billy, they had a picture of Billy. I said, Billy really reminded me of you, Steve. Different personalities, but very similar gifting and heart. And he said, yes, I know of Billy. I've never met him. I said, well, you guys are, brothers. And and then Rick. When I think of Rick Kallenberg, I shared we would gather each night, and Titus and Momo, it was such a rich time. And I said, and we were praying for John as we were getting scraps of news about his health, and we all know where he's at health-wise, and then we were hearing even more. We'd talked to him in New York at the airport, and I could tell he was really weak 2 weeks ago. And so we got through, and Momo talked to him, and Momo is, John's best friend in Africa. And so they love John Corey. And we were talking about John, and I said this, and I say it publicly because I really believe it. When we realized John wasn't going to be able to give much more earthly time to this, I wondered, who would God raise up? And right under our nose almost, Rick has been connected with this congregation for about 10 years. Helped Katie and Jeremy go to Africa 10 years ago, and has been such an assist. And to spend these 2 weeks with Rick, Gary had told me that when he traveled with him, he's Corey-esque. When he gets there, he kicks into a new gear. Just like those of you who've traveled with John know, when he gets overseas, it's just like, wow. Well, Rick is so gifted for this and so equipped. He's administratively, he can keep track of things that I don't begin to. He has such a heart for this, and he has such a heart for like Titus and Momo and Ken over in Kenya, and Alan Koki, the coordinator in Uganda, and I don't know the guy's name in Ethiopia, but he's connecting with men, and now he's got Stephen Anchi in Ghana, and he's coordinating, moving 450 players across that country border and seeing these miraculous, times when the customs don't fight us. And pray for Rick, and he's separated from Carol. That's the wrong way to put it. It sounds bad. Carol is supportively, here in Texas, allowing him to do this and supporting him in prayer. And he was getting good ideas from her because, of course, she's spending a lot of time in Africa, too. So it was a rich time to just see how their marriage is all about Christ, and to see these three men, as well as Titus and Momo that Jeremy talked about, it was a remarkable thing, of many remarkable things. But God is raising up, it seems, just the right men, and they give themselves to this in a way that is very, very encouraging. And I would just say that Billy and Steve I would love to have them here. I would love to have them. They would carry, I think, a pastor's conference in America. I'd go to that pastor's conference. I was fed. My soul was refreshed as they exhorted and taught God's word. And so praise God for those men and pray for them. And I share that with you because it isn't like there's no leaders in Africa, but the church in Africa is far outstripping the American church in number now. And Billy was saying how the churches of Europe are shrinking, and that he was challenging the Ghanaian pastors that we need to be the sending agency now. We've received, and I think I'm probably repeating somebody else here, but it was powerful to hear them say of a vision to send 50,000 missionaries from Nigeria. And we were in Ghana, and Momo's from Liberia, and all these countries we're talking about. So it's exciting. It's also challenging. Islam is growing. The challenge of Islam, it's very dangerous in Nigeria. And Ghana is a target, and they all sense it, and you can feel it. It's coming down from the north, and they're becoming more and more bold, but it's exciting to see. Stephen was preaching, and outside, the the Islamic droning prayer started in. And it was irritant. And he kept preaching. And finally he said, "Don't let that irritate you." He said, "That just tells you we got a lot of work to do." And that's just the tone they had. And he had many stories of leading Muslims to Christ and the liberation, but also, of course, the many stories like Jeremy shared of one, that the militant, violent movement against the cross and Christ is very real too. So pray for Africa. This is Mission Sunday, and I would exhort us, because I've been exhorted repeatedly for 2 weeks now. This gospel isn't ours, it's His. This isn't for just Africa, it's for the world. It's not just for America, that's for sure. God is raising up a people from every tribe and tongue, and we get the privilege to be part of it. And I'm so thrilled that we can be a part of what God is doing. And every one of us, Billy gave such a great exposition of those 4 questions in Romans 10. It was so moving. I'm going to be quoting him, I'm sure, as I think of the haunting nature of those questions and the driving logic of those questions that goes right to every believer. We either go or we're sending, or we're disobedient. And it's a joy to think that we can be involved in what God is doing for eternity. So if it was an African service right now, I'd just have you stand up and sing, stretch a bit, and then I'd go after you for another 90 minutes. And so no, I'm not going to do that. But I did like these African traditions, man. I spoke 17 times, and it was like, how many hours? Maybe they'd let you go. So, it was great. But every time I spoke, no matter how long I spoke, the Africans spoke longer. so they got some endurance, is all I can say. But we want to thank you for letting us share. We feel inadequate to share what we'd really like to, but we'd certainly be available for Q&A, But everybody's getting hungry, and I hear there's good Ghanaian food out there.